I'm a god.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow?
I'm a god.
There wasn't one today.
Why haven't you seen the gold rush?
Why
seen the mist?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Filmwhys, also known as the Why Haven't You Seen This Film podcast. I'm your host, Bubba Wheat from Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights, and it has been a while. First off, I'd like to thank everybody for listening to this episode. If you are listening to the new Filmwhys feed, thank you, and it's now on Anchor.fm, where every episode will remain, as Anchor.fm has a much larger storage than Podomatic, which I used previously, and I had to rotate the episodes. If you're listening as this is a bonus episode in It's Time to Rewind, then welcome. This is episode 86. Over on Anchor.fm, I have a dedicated feed for this podcast, Filmwhys, and you can go back and subscribe to that one, and you can listen to all the episodes. It goes back to 2013, and here each episode I'm introduced to a movie that I've never seen and my guest loves, and in return they're introduced to a superhero or comic book movie that they've never seen. And today, my guest is Justin Gott from the Rambling Ramblers podcast. How are you doing today?
What's going on, man? It's been a long time.
Yes, it has. And, here in this first segment, I'm going to take a little bit to get to know Justin here. And if you have listened to my previous episodes, I did have a series of questions that I would ask everybody. But since Justin is a returning guest, and I think also moving here on in, I'm going to have it be a little bit more free form. But I did want to remind him of a couple questions that I asked him in the first episode, which was way back in episode 23, where he introduced me to the movie Fargo, and I introduced him to the movie Hellboy. And, first off, I did listen back to that episode, and I want to apologize straight off the bat because you hated Hellboy.
I did.
And this time I made you watch Spawn, which I knew going into it is not the best movie, but I think it's important and worth discussing. Yeah, disgusting. No, there's an apt Freudian slip for you.
Yeah.
I know that this podcast, there is a lot of bad and mediocre superhero movies. The more recent ones, they've become a lot better.
Right.
But I've always known that a lot of times I'm going to have disproportionate movies. Like I'm going to pair a good movie with a not so good movie.
Right.
But, welcoming you back, I didn't think, this time I'm going to have you watch another not so great movie. So I would like to apologize for that.
It's totally fine. I was obviously a part of the selection committee in that, so I didn't have to even go along with that suggestion, so to speak. But I will say that listening back to that original episode, I did the same. And it was funny to me that you mentioned that it was possible we could have done the Iron Giant instead of Hellboy at the time. And I was so sad after hearing that because I've since watched the Iron Giant and it is beautiful and wonderful and one of my favorite animated movies ever. And I was like, man, that would have been just an epic podcast to have Fargo and the Iron Giant together. And then, then of course we didn't do that. So, and then to kind of run it back here, not that we had maybe that same option this time around, but still, I thought it was pretty funny to run that back. But that being said, it will be fun. I'm excited to hear you talk about the things that you say are so valuable to glean from Spawn, because I wasn't able to find those. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, we'll save that though. And, a couple other things, and one of them we did talk a little bit about before we started recording here, but I do ask everybody what their favorite superhero movie is. And at the time, you said that your favorite was Iron Man. Is that still your favorite, or there's been a ton of great superhero movies that have come out since then. Has that
Hmm.
changed since then?
Yeah, I would say so. I think, hmm, I think definitely Black Panther I like more than the first Iron Man. I would definitely say that the combo of Infinity War and Endgame, like I know they're two different movies. I don't need people to tell me that they're not. But if you put those two together, I think both individually and together as a whole story, I think that they're better than the initial Iron Man as well. I think the initial Guardians of the Galaxy also came out since we recorded, and that one would probably be up there pretty high. I don't think it's top five in my Marvel, but it's pretty high up there. So one of those, I think Black Panther's the first one that comes to my mind, and because I mean that was obviously not only just a really solid movie, but it was something that just hit a huge. It was just so foundational to the comic book movement, but also societally as well, being such an important film. So
And I think it is interesting that you say Black Panther because it is what Spawn potentially could have been.
yeah, yeah, you're right, you're right. But Spawn was terrible.
The other thing from that, which was what we talked about, is your biggest film-wise at the time was the Godfather trilogy, and
Yes,
you mentioned, and I had looked it up. You have covered Godfathers 1 and 2 on your podcast, The Rambling Ramblers, and The Godfather was your first episode.
yes,
Before you talk about that, have you watched Godfather 3 yet?
I have not.
Okay. I know a lot of people said that one is not worth watching, but then also relatively recently he came out with the I believe it's Godfather 3 Coda but like basically the director's cut of
Right,
Godfather 3, and I've heard that does make up for some of the weaknesses.
I have
Um,
heard that as well.
so that might be worth checking out at some point. But
Yeah, I definitely think I will because I enjoyed the first two so much that I think that it'll have to happen, no matter how bad, air quotes, that it might be. But yeah, listening back to that was pretty funny because at the time I was doing the Rambling Ramblers movie podcast with Pat McDonnell, and we were, I think we were like 20 some episodes in, I think at the time. And, it was fun. We were having a good time, but funny enough, I think about, I don't know, less than a year, I'll say later, we kind of put it on hiatus because I started a new career. Pat was super busy. We had brought in another co-host. There were three of us, my friend Pete, and it was a lot of fun, but we weren't able to get it done. It was like months between episodes, and it was just one of those things where it didn't feel like it was worth the time. So flash forward to a pandemic and a little more free time on hands, and Pete and I decided to start the podcast back up again. And so we did a rebrand of it, new logo, new website, and new conceit for the show, which in this case was kind of an in-joke on a lot of what we talked about on the first version of it, which was that a movie would be new to me, a lot like what you do here on this show, which is like, you kidding me, Justin? You haven't seen this movie yet? And so, yeah, it was a movie new to me. And then Pete, my co-host, is a huge cinephile, has seen assumedly every movie. It seems that way at times. And so it's a movie he loves and a classic and something I haven't seen. And we just kind of come at it from those two different angles. And so, funny enough, the inspiration for that idea and kind of where we got our gears spinning in that direction was The Godfather, because I still hadn't watched it. And it was funny because in our first episode, or not our first episode, in yours and mine episode of yours,
Mhm.
I said that I was going to watch The Godfather soon. So apparently 6 years is soon. But either way, I have seen it and I loved it. The first one more than the second one. I know a lot of people tend to say that the sequel is better. I prefer the first one myself.
Yeah, I think I covered the. I didn't look it up, but the first Godfather was, I think, in the first 20 episodes of this show, and I still have not watched the second or the third one myself.
Oh, oh wow. Second one is, I mean, it's very, very good, and I understand why people like it more. I just, yeah, if you go back and listen to our episode, you'll see what my issues with it were. But I think it's an amazing movie, absolutely, of course. But carve out a full day because it's long.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you kind of rebranded and rejiggered your Ramblers podcast,
Hmm.
and I have listened to a few episodes,
Oh, thank you.
and it is a lot of fun, and I do like how you have the segments, and why don't you talk about a little bit about like the different segments and how
Sure.
you and Pete came up with the concept for those.
Well, I'm a very structured person. I like to have outlines for things. I was most recently a high school teacher, so lesson plans were very important to your day to day. And if you didn't have one, the day could go awry very easily. And so when we were crafting kind of what the new show would look like, instead of a, just loosey goosey, whatever happens, happens sort of conversation, I mean, we still do that, but it's just baked within segments. And so every one of our shows, we open with what we call What You've Been Watching Lately. It's just, 10 minutes probably where we just each mention a movie we've seen and talk about that. So that's been fun because we've been able to, reference both new movies and old movies and different things that are happening. And that's just really easy just to get the gears flowing and kind of the juices moving along as you get, the beginning of a podcast. And
Yeah.
so then we jump into our actual movie. We only do the one movie per episode. And yeah, so our first category is You Already Know, which is just me talking about the things that I'm already aware of going into the movie. Since again, the movie is new to me, it's what do I already know or what am I already aware of?
Yeah, and
So,
I usually cover that not in its own segment, but
right,
whenever I talk about the new to me movie on this show,
right,
because yeah, it is, some movies it's like, yeah, I knew practically the entire outline of this movie through osmosis before ever seeing it, and then other
right.
times it's like I knew absolutely nothing about this movie except
Yeah,
for its title and that it's a
yep.
good movie.
Yep, exactly. And that's been fun to see the differences as I've kind of approached movies is that there was one, and I know this, and again, it's not shocking to anybody who actually listens to us that I haven't seen a movie, but for me to not have even heard of a movie is pretty weird because I'm pretty knowledgeable still. And we did The Night of the Hunter a few months ago, and I honestly had never even heard of that movie before we said we were going to do it. And so something like that versus say like The Godfather, which is so much in the lexicon of, movie lovers that I knew a lot about. Anyway, we do that, and then we do what's called Let's Check It Out, where Pete, being the person who knows the movie much better, does just a history on it, like doesn't regurgitate the Wikipedia page. He puts his own spin on it, but kind of that where you get, box office information, awards information about the director, about the stars, whoever is kind of like the main, the heavy hitters, if you will, of the movie. And just kind of, we go back and forth about some of the things that kind of make that movie tick without talking about the movie itself. Then we jump into what we call Like a Virgin, where the reason it's called that is because we basically both view the movie through virgin eyes. Like for me, it is like, against me seeing it for the first time. And then I kind of asked Pete to look at it as like, what was new to you? What did you see this time that you hadn't seen before? And so
Right.
that's a nice way to branch off into just our conversation about what the movie was like, what we liked, what we didn't like. And we really get into the heavy conversations in that segment. Then we dive into themes in our segment, which is called Double Rainbow. Again, looking for the things of like what's under the surface. Like what are the things that like you can't really see when you're watching the movie, but are totally there. And is it text? Is it subtext? And those sorts of things. That's where the heavier conversations happen. And, him and I being really, really good friends, I think some of our chemistry really shines there, where we're able to talk about, sometimes personal issues, sometimes really personal feelings. We try not to get too divisive, and, potentially, but when we've had episodes where, movies are dealing with, sensitive subjects and political subjects, we're not afraid, to get into those sorts of things. So that's where kind of the heaviness will potentially lie. So then we finish off with a couple games. So I don't know which one's my favorite. I really don't. But the first one is called The Good Son Off, and this is something I created long ago when I was writing for Man I Love Films. And I used to do it in written form with people that I did like an email column where I would email back and forth with someone like 5 or 6 times, and then I would post it. And this was something I would ask people in those emails, which is basically the movie The Good Son Off. Not The Good Son. The movie The Good Son. I'm so used to saying it. The movie The Good Son with Macaulay Culkin and Elijah Wood. Famously, at the end of the movie, huge spoiler, I don't care, the mother figure is holding both of them over a cliff and has to decide which one she's going to keep and which one she's going to drop. But in my game that I've created, what I do is I pick either 2 characters or themes or ideas or random thoughts that I had about the movie that kind of compete against each other, and I make Pete keep one and drop one. And it's a lot of fun because he never knows what they are going into the episode. To hear him kind of debate it and go back and forth in his head is always fun. And it's just kind of fun to see him, choose that. And so it's just one of those things that as a listener, I think about or as a podcaster, I think about what would I like to listen to. And those,
Yeah,
and
it's
that's
one of those things that it's a lot of fun. It's very light, but it also brings about a little added discussion about the individual characters with
exactly. And then our second to last segment is probably my favorite. It's called Remake This. And we don't always do it because obviously some movies wouldn't lend themselves to it. But the idea is that every movie gets remade nowadays, and we don't support that, especially with classics. We did The Godfather, Some Like It Hot, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like, those are the types of movies you don't want to see remade. But if they were to get remade, we want to cast those movies. And so we basically just come up with our director and 4 acting roles that we would like to see the casting be our decision. That one's probably my favorite for 2 reasons. One is just because I love the casting side of things, and I actually spend way too much time trying to figure mine out. But it's just fun because, again, Pete doesn't know mine. I don't know Pete's. And so it's fun to get genuine reactions to some of those things. And then I make a visual thing that I always put up on our Twitter and Instagram pages. And I've had a lot of fun making those and putting them on our website. And so I love it. There's some interaction that's involved there with fans. And I don't know, I just love it.
Yeah, I like listening to those sort of things, but recasting is something that I personally am that's something that is so hard for me to wrap my head around.
Sure.
That it's not something that I would be very good at doing myself.
I feel like in another life I was a casting director. And so it's a little arrogant, but I think that some of mine have just been amazing. And then famously, Pete has never won one of our Remake This polls. And so he always says that he's not as good at it, which is partially true. It's partially that he doesn't prepare for that one as well. And that one's like the last thing he does. After that, we've had some games, we've had some great talks, and it's been fun. Growing up as a kid, I was probably in, single digits, early double digits. I used to watch the show called The Sports Reporters, which sports fans out there will know. It was just 4, it might have been 5, but I think it was 4 old sports writers who would talk about the week's, issues. It was like a Sunday morning show. And they would close every show with a segment called Parting Shots, where they would each get to do this 45-second to a minute and a half monologue that they wrote. And they were all newspaper writers. So it was all just perfectly crafted, well read, just really nice kind of final thought on one story from the week. And I love the way that would end. That's just such a great send off to get this, perfect oration of something that they believe in. And so Pete and I close every show with parting shots, which we each write our own monologue about the movie we just talked about. And it's the hardest to prepare for because I think we're both pretty good writers. And so we spend a lot of time on it, crafting it, making it sound perfect. So I spend a lot of time on it, but I love it because I think it's the perfect send up or the perfect wrap up for every episode. And so that's how we end. And that's our show, man. I thank you for letting me do that because it's, we spend a lot of time putting it together and making it the way that it is. And, it's nice that it's appreciated and I personally love it. I think the fact that we started it that way, episode 1, and it's the same now, that I felt like we had a good idea to begin with. And I'm confident that it's really good.
Yeah, I like a good structure myself. I mean, this is episode 86, and the structure is pretty much exactly the same as it has been from episode 1, with the exception of, I've been going back through the old episodes as I've been re-releasing them on the new feed once every day.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been fun to look back at the previous episodes, even though I typically don't actually re-listen to them because, like most people, I'm not fond of listening to my own voice. But there's really only been like 2 episodes where I sort of shifted the format a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
where one episode was I took a new release that was new to both of us, and then I took a non-superhero favorite of mine, that like underseen favorite of mine that I had my guest watch for the first time. And then I also did one episode that was TV series, which was also kind of a similar, where it was a reversal. So that way I got to talk about my favorite TV series, The Simpsons. And then I was introduced to a superhero adjacent series, Jack of All Trades. But yeah, it's been great to hear more about your podcast and catch up. After the last time we talked, which was 7 years ago.
That's crazy.
But now let's go ahead and talk about the film that you had me watch for the first time, The Mist.
We are experiencing some kind of disaster.
Makes the Ebola virus look like a skin rash.
Something in the mist!
Peekaboo.
Promise you won't let the monsters get me.
I see you.
No, it's the end of days.
Don't get cocky. You have a lot more to learn.
Read the good book. It calls for blood.
This is just what they want. You're playing that game. Then now play dirty.
It could be the whole world for all we know. Wouldn't make us any less dead.
You've been violated, girly man.
The Mist came out in 2007, written and directed by Frank Darabont, based on a Stephen King novel, starring Thomas Jane, who played the Punisher, the Thing's wife from the Tim Story Fantastic Four movie, Cliff Clavin's mother, Toby Jones, who played Arnim Zola in the Captain America movies, the Shermanator, and William Sadler, who's great in everything, but especially Tales from the Crypt, both the show and the Demon Knight movie. So, I've clearly never seen this, but what was it about The Mist? I know that I did set a guideline that I knew that this was coming out in October, so I wanted to do something horror themed.
Yeah.
So, aside from that, what made you just pick out The Mist for my movie?
Well, I mean, that's the first part, is that it's probably my favorite horror movie, or at least in my top 4 or 5 at the minimum. It's a good story. I think there's a lot of really effective moments throughout. I was really keyed in on a lot of the conversation within the grocery store this time around, especially living in a post-pandemic world and, seeing how people really are and just the way that, it deals with just the human condition. But I mean, it's the ending. I mean, it's probably the most effective, just difficult ending that I've ever seen in a movie. And it just hangs with you. It can't not. That double negative is intentional. Like, when you think about this movie, like, it's what do you want to leave your audience with? And you can have an amazing story for, 105 minutes and completely screw it up in the last 5 and make people only remember a terrible thing at the end. And when I mean terrible, I mean like objectively, like it's just not good. And in the case of The Mist, you can like it or not. I am happy to hear both sides of those arguments, whether I didn't like the ending or I liked the ending. It is completely inarguable that you're going to forget it because it is so devastating, and movies just aren't made that way anymore. Like I tweeted after I rewatched it this week, it's kind of a miracle it exists to me. Now, I understand Stephen King, Frank Darabont, like there's backing behind it, but the fact that they were able to make it with that ending and get it past the powers that be, it's kind of impressive. It really, really is. And so beyond the performances, Marcia Gay Harden in particular, we'll talk about, beyond the, as I mentioned earlier, human condition angle, like the way that it really looks at, who we are as humans and our nature. I just think that ending is so powerful and just a literal punch to the gut. And so it's for that reason that it's just so memorable.
Yeah, and I didn't do a ton of research into this movie, but one of the things that I did catch was that whenever Frank Darabont was trying to get this movie made, he did have a deal with a different, or the beginnings of a deal with a different studio with more money, and he declined that offer and went with a different studio and gave up a large portion of his salary just so he could keep the ending.
I mean, that's amazing then. I mean, that's a creative. That is somebody who cares about the art. Like, I understand that they're all doing it for the money. Like, that's their way that they make an income. I understand that. But there is a level of artist to, a lot of these people. And that, I think, is a perfect example of it, where he wouldn't back down from that. Now, it made me think of the reason I say like it's a miracle it exists. Like I'm surprised that I actually got there is, an example that I think of right away is Get Out, which to me is probably one of my top 20 movies of all time. Like I love it. I think it's amazing. Jordan Peele is, he's a master, but it's not the original ending. I mean, like, there was a much darker ending that he originally filmed, and, they changed it because either focus groups, suggested they wanted something a little happier, or powers that be said, hey, we need something a little bit lighter. Whatever the reasons are, they did it.
Yeah, and personally, I'm a fan. Well, I think a fan is too strong of a word, maybe, but
Yes.
I do enjoy whenever filmmakers, especially, do put in the unhappy endings or the endings that aren't, the super happy Wayne's World ending. It just hits you differently. It makes you think about the movie more.
100%.
It leaves a stronger impression for the most part because it is against the norm. And, speaking of what I knew about this movie before watching it, which we had talked about beforehand, the only things that I really knew was that it was a horror movie. It has mist in it with creatures, and it had a gut punch ending, and then just a few months ago, just randomly, I don't remember what, I think it was just something I saw on Twitter or Facebook. I ended up, I was curious, and somebody shared the clip of the ending of this, and so I did watch just the 2-minute chunk that basically started. I think it started with the pan of all 4 of them in the car, and then the gunshots, and then him getting out and seeing the tanks. And that is just, the biggest gut punch ending to see these characters, even without having any context of watching the 2 hours
Right.
that came before it.
Exactly.
But just this capturing the amount of despair that got them to the level where they felt that this was the only option to save themselves the potential pain of,
Mm-hmm.
I know this now, but I didn't know this at the time, but like, basically eaten from the inside out.
Sure.
From
Or ripped apart, or, however you go out
yeah,
via
any
those
number of
animals.
painful deaths
Exactly.
to just take this way out. And he was prepared to, save them the horrific death.
Yep.
And so Thomas Jane's character committed the act because there were 5 people and only 4 bullets.
Of course.
And then for him to realize that if I had waited just literally 30 to 60 more seconds, then we all could have survived.
Yeah, it's, I'm only laughing because to me, it's, like I said, I'm workshopping a script right now with a couple of friends. We're kind of putting some touches on it. And, I chuckle because we're kind of going in that direction too, where we want to kind of land a punch at the end because it's just so memorable. Like, you're just like, oh my God, I can't believe they just did that. It's just utter shock. Again, you don't want to be remembered just for an ending. You want the payoff to have been worth it. So you obviously have to set those things up. And I think that, both the relationships that they form within the grocery store, the fact that like these people kind of banded together and have survived to this point, to then have to go out this way, it's just devastating. And I think life has those moments. Life is pretty brutal. And so I think that, again, especially in a I don't even know if you can say post-pandemic world yet. Like I thought we could for a little while, but now I guess not. But in that world, I think it holds that much more weight. It's that much more of a punch because it just reveals so much more about what is actually true and less cinematic. Darabont is like, no, we're doing everybody. And then literally he's going to get out of the car. And his line is something like, they died for what? And you're just like, yeah, for absolutely nothing. And it's just gutting and it's sad. And it's, I think, just an emotional way to end what is it's a effects laden, monster movie. But at the same time, like I said before, it's a really deep look at human nature. And I think that I think it's a worthy payoff.
Yeah. And there is a couple of things that I did want to talk about
Sure.
And the ending, I think, because it's something that is really prevalent, especially with all the Marvel movies, and that's spoiler culture. And I think I'm somebody that I don't care about spoilers one way or the other. I don't seek them out, but I also, if somebody spoils me of something, I just read it and go, huh, okay, and then I move on. It's not a big deal. This movie was technically, quote unquote, spoiled for me because I saw the ending. But if the movie is good, the spoiling enhances the movie rather than detracts from it. Just because I know the end point does not make the lead up, it does not make the journey with these characters any less enjoyable. And this movie especially is about despair. And this really captures just this building of despair throughout the entire runtime of the film. And I think that's something that this film really does beautifully because it's like this unknown, and how different characters and how different people handled this just building despair in different ways.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, and I think the religion angle obviously is a big one, and with Marcia Gay Harden's character kind of taking over half the grocery store, and getting a slow congregation to eventually form, and the perils of that world, and being able to use that sort of mentality for violence and ultimately for ill towards other people. I mean, again, you see it in the world today, and I think it holds a mirror up to a number of different types of people, and not just religious people and specifically extremists, but I think that it does it with a lot of other people too, whether it's the alpha, or whether it's, even like the guy who owns the grocery store. I think there was a really good moment where Toby Jones' character, he's trying to tell his boss that this stuff is actually happening, and the grocery store owner is very just, he doesn't really pay attention to what Toby Jones has to say. He's just kind of like, I'm going to write you up, and, he's just very negative towards him, kind of demeaning.
Well, I think that's a good position where it's like shows his place in society.
Exactly,
And,
that's what I mean, yeah.
And yeah, it's him still stuck in his role where he, even though it's entirely likely that he's younger than Toby Jones's character, but
Right.
he's his superior within the structure of the grocery store.
Ooh, yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, 100%. And then just for Toby Jones to just respond to him with like, you need to shut up and listen to this. It was, again, it's that superiority just gets smacked in its face. And it's like, you may have more power, but in this case, I have knowledge, and you need to listen to this in this particular moment. And that's just a small little throwaway moment, but I think it also reveals about a certain character that I think is really powerful.
And I do think that The Mist in general perfectly captures the whole fear of the unknown, because
Absolutely.
just The Mist in general and the way that The Mist is portrayed for the majority of this movie, it's just this blinding white nothing. It envelops basically the entire world outside of this grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And you can only see like a few feet away, and even whenever they go out into it. And I think the best moments of creatures is when they are just half seen within the mist. Like I think the best creature moment is near the end, whenever they're driving away, and this just massive creature is shaking them, and then you just see it mostly obscured by the fog just walking past them. I think that is the most beautiful moment of the creature design in this film, because I will say that the one complaint that I had with this film is the 2007 CGI on the majority of the insects and the creatures don't exactly hold up.
I mean, maybe, I guess. I mean, it's hard not to agree or disagree with that. I mean, sure, but I think it works. I don't think it takes away from the movie. I think you're like, oh, okay, there's a thing, like there it is, and there, that's where it is. I know you're not being combative in any way, so I won't be either. But I was ready, in case that was the type of person you were, to be like, you showed me the Spawn and bad CGI, like it's kind of pot calling kettle black. So yeah, I see where you're coming from, and of course, yeah, CGI gets better. 15 years later, they probably do a much better job with it. But I think if you want to take the very first time we see anything, which is the scene when poor Norm gets pulled underneath the sliding door, the tentacles are, I mean, it's pretty legit, and it's legitimately scary too.
Yeah, I like the tentacles. My biggest complaint was basically the scene whenever. No, I actually liked the spiders fairly well, because they were mostly farther away. I think their faces looked a little goofy because
Sure.
they had like the bug eyes, like the like almost cartoonish googly eyes.
They did, yeah.
But my biggest complaint was whenever the like locust type monsters and then the pterodactyl like monsters come into the grocery store. I think that was the weakest moment, not just because of the CGI,
right,
but also because I felt like the monsters work better when they are this half-viewed, mysterious creatures in the distance that you don't get a good look at. I think whenever they came into the grocery store, which I understand that was partly necessary for the story, because
Right.
that showed that they weren't safe with staying inside the grocery store,
Right.
because the monsters could break through the glass. But I just didn't like that it made the creatures much more of a concrete idea. It's like,
Sure.
these are just giant creatures that we can see and we know more or less what they are. I mean, there is a large variety of them that we don't see, and
Right.
that does help a bit.
That's fair. And I will say that I agree with 100% the idea that they work better when they are not really seen or when they're just kind of outside of your vision. But to use the metaphor of it being about life and about things other than this science fiction story, sometimes the things that that are kind of fearful and that we are fearful of, that are kind of just outside of our vision, sometimes they come crashing in and we can't do anything about it, but have to, combat it right now because this is the most pressing issue.
But I will say that one other thing that I did like about that scene is that the way that the characters reacted and how it did show the failings of humanity. Like, nobody,
Yes.
This isn't a grocery store filled with action stars. This
Right.
is a grocery store filled with normal people, and they're doing the best they can, but they're all making mistakes, and pretty devastating mistakes in certain aspects. Like, some of them are realizing that the light attracts the bugs, but then the other characters are like turning more lights on because they think that that's
Yes.
what they need to do.
Yep. And it's established too, because literally 5 minutes earlier, Thomas Jane had told them only in emergencies turn these on, and if something gets in the store, so they were following directions.
Yeah.
But now things have changed, and people just aren't nimble enough. And again, living in the world we're living in right now, that could not be more correct. People not being able to be nimble and just adjust to new things that we've learned.
Yeah, and
Amazing.
in a state of panic, and they're all literally in a state of panic, and they're making bad decisions because of that.
Yes, absolutely. There was one line in particular that I wanted to highlight, and it was when they go into the loading dock for the first time, and the two guys who work at the store or whatever, Myron and I forget the other guy's name, the particularly aggressive one, but they go in there and they're like, we're just going to open it up and Norm's going to go out and fix the thing. And David, Thomas Jane's character, is like, you really shouldn't do that. It's kind of not the best thing to do. And Toby Jones says, kind of let them do what they're going to do. And the line is, in here, there's a problem they can solve. And holy cow, that landed with me, because it feels like that is the kind of general consensus, that what people like to do is they're like, here is a small practical thing within my grasp that I can actually do something about. I can't control everything that's going on out there, but I'm going to do this one thing and fix it. And what's crazy about it is, no, you can't. And it's just the way that they are then showed to be wrong and that they should have listened. That moment really, really resounded with me.
Yeah, and I really love William Sadler's character arc throughout this entire movie, because he is, he starts off in that scene thinking that he knows what he's doing is right, and that Thomas Jane's character is just some rich Hollywood guy that moved here, and he thinks that he's better than all of us.
Right.
And then immediately
what's funny
afterwards,
about that, sorry to interrupt, David never comes across that way to me in those first like 10 minutes or whatever. He seems to be a very like respectable, like just to himself and to his family and helpful. And, you know, I don't know. It's just, that's another thing too about people making assumptions about other people based on where they're from, based on general perceptions of people. And I think that's really valuable too, to have that in there. And then, yeah, I know where you're going to, where he ends up becoming like the religious fanatic yelling for expiation. Like, you know, it's quite the turn for that character.
It's like he's just looking for the nearest answer, and he latches onto that, whatever it may be. Like at the beginning, he's like, well, this is the answer. I know we just need to clear out the exhaust for this generator so we have power. And then, like, Thomas Jane shows that he's right, and then he's immediately, okay, I'm going to follow Thomas Jane because he knows what he's doing. But then as soon as he leads them to the pharmacy with all the spiders, and then he gets shocked by that, he's like, okay, I'm not following Thomas Jane anymore because he's not 100% correct. What's the next person? Well, that's Marcia Gay Harden's character. So I'm going to latch on to her and think that she's the one that's right.
Yeah, he would definitely be the guy taking horse deworming pills.
Oh, that is a whole nother conversation.
Sorry, I couldn't hold it back anymore.
But I did, you know, there is so much, and the one thing that I am slightly disappointed about this format versus my other podcast where, you know, I've spent hours upon hours discussing Groundhog Day in minute detail.
Right.
And this is a movie where you could do that. This could easily work in the like minute by minute format. But I did want to touch a little bit on, you know, a couple little details. Like I did love the symbolism of whenever Toby Jones kills Marcia Gay Harden's character. And I think it's interesting that he does use 2 bullets for her. And I think that in itself is interesting just because there's only 12 bullets. And and this movie does do a good job because it's only shot 12 times.
Right.
And he uses 2 bullets on her, so he's using this precious commodity to get rid of this obstacle and does like basically waste 1 extra bullet on her. He shoots her in the stomach and then he shoots her again in the head. And then whenever they leave, you know, there's the overhead shot with her having basically the blood halo spreading out from her head.
Yeah, and the only thing I would say is, you know, yes, the creatures are terrible. They're outside. You know, they pose a real threat. But she poses a different threat, and in some ways a bigger threat, because what she's able to do is she's able to push a crowd to basically want to sacrifice a small child. And, you know, to see like, you know, him use a certain amount of bullets or whatever on, you know, the flying creature versus, or the same essentially as he would with her, I think just shows what sort of imminent threat that she actually was, and the extremes to which we are able to allow ourselves to go, and if not yourself, like what you certainly see people do. And, you know, I think there's a reason for that. I think that Darabont is very specific about that.
That there is one other like slight detail that I wanted to point out that I thought was funny. I saw it in the trivia as well. Whenever they do go next door to the pharmacy, Thomas Jane pulls a Hellboy comic, and I read in the trivia that it was originally going to be a Punisher comic, but at the time he wasn't that happy with, you know, the way his Punisher movie was received and all that stuff. So he suggested that it be a Hellboy comic, according to the trivia, like because of his friendship with Ron Perlman. But I also think that it's interesting because that first Hellboy movie does deal with a lot of Cthulhu mythology, and I feel like the majority of the creatures in this movie are inspired by that same Cthulhu mythology.
That is interesting. And that was our first episode, so that is completely unintentional, but what a connection.
Yeah, everything is connected.
Can we, before we move on, because I know we're about to move on to Spawn, can we talk about Marcia Gay Harden for a second? Holy cow, she's amazing in this role. Like,
yeah, I think one of her best lines, and like I'm not gonna quote it in full, but like during the moment in the bathroom, whenever the love interest character, well, I say love interest, but like they share a glance early on.
It's
but
not.
There's
I mean,
not.
yeah.
Yeah, it's, I guess, potential
Sure.
love interest, but there's no, and I do love, sidetracking again, I do love that they don't make that into a love interest story.
I mean, he's too committed to his wife. I mean, that is his still goal, is getting home to her. I think she's there as, I mean, it's just a young, attractive woman who lives in the town. That's perfectly fine. I think there is a potential like long game that they could play with that, where it's like, well, if everything is really going to hell out there and we're able to make it out, then we are two attractive people who can be together. And she's motherly, which is important for his son. So I think there's those things, but yeah, I never gather a true romantic relationship there.
Yeah, I think I was expecting it to go that way, because he does do like a double take towards her whenever he first sees her, and I thought, oh, is that like hinting at something? And then it doesn't go that way, but then I'm so invested in everything else that I completely forget about that part. But whenever she goes into the bathroom with Marcia Gay Harden and she's like, well, I was just trying to be friendly, and she says, if I wanted a friend like you, I would squat down and crap one out.
Yeah, exactly. It's so sudden and harsh, and you understand her character now immediately because of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and she does play a great character, like a character that you love to hate, but it does have that cult leader-ish personality, because it is, I think it does follow a lot where cult leaders, what they do is they do break you down first. It's like they cut you down and then they're the ones that build you back up. And I think that she does hint at that throughout this film, and she does have elements of that to where she's charismatic to a certain extent, even though in the beginning it feels like nobody's ever going to listen to her because all she's doing is insulting everybody. But that's actually part of a good cult leader technique.
And I mean, ultimately, it's if you kind of stumble your way into being correct about something, or within the arena of correct, and now all of a sudden you seem prophetic, now all of a sudden your words hold a little more weight. And yeah, it's such a disaster for the people in the grocery store. And I think it's really effective how they use, David Thomas Jane's character sleeping for a majority of a day. And in that time, which we're not around for, she goes from maybe only having a small following to now having a much larger following. And just how quickly that can happen. You close your eyes for 1 second, you turn around and look what just happened. And I think, again, there's a really valuable look into kind of who we are and how we tend to handle things.
Yeah, it really feels, it reminds me, even though I don't have a lot of experience with zombie movies, but it feels like the zombie movie out structure, to where it's not about the zombies, it's about, the people are the real enemy.
Of course, yeah.
And this movie does that extremely well.
Absolutely.
And yeah, thank you for making me watch this movie. I really truly enjoyed it, and my only gripes were extremely minor, and I did pretty much love this movie, and I was riveted from start to finish.
That's great. The only thing I will add at the end is something I've always wanted to do and never been able to obtain it. So I know it exists in some form, but there is a black and white version of this movie. And I think it would be extremely effective. I think it's one of those movies that could really lend itself to that format. And I would definitely love to see it. I think it's on one of the releases they put out, either a Blu-ray or something that I just don't own. And I would welcome watching that for sure.
All right, well, we are going to take a quick break, and then whenever we come back, we're going to talk about the movie that I had you watch the first time, Spawn.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
Spawn came out in 1997 based on the Image comic created by Todd McFarlane and starring Michael Jai White, John Leguizamo, and Martin Sheen. It's a bit of an odd time chronologically as it came out a year before the first Blade movie, but it's also not the first black superhero movie, as Meteor Man and Blank Man came out a few years earlier, though this did come out just 2 weeks before Shaq's Steel hit theaters. So thank goodness I didn't make you watch that movie.
I bet you I'd have liked it more. I 1,000% believe that. Anyway, sorry.
But, you know, this is a movie. It's Michael Jai White's first major starring role after playing Mike Tyson in the TV movie Tyson just a few years earlier. And this film did suffer a lot of problems because the film did have a rushed release where they cut the budget, and it was originally going to be an R, or at least the writer-director wanted it to be an R, but they had to scale it back to a PG-13. And they also practically tripled the amount of special effects shots that they had originally planned. And the co-writer and director, Mark DePay, was more of a visual effects guy, along with the second unit director, Spaz Williams, who got a dog named after him. And they were both from ILM. And it was rushed, and you can tell that the majority, like, there is a stark contrast between special effects that I think were extremely good for 1997 versus the worst CGI devil ever.
Yes.
And again, you know, I'm sorry for making you watch this, but at the same time, I kind of love this movie. For all its failures, it has charm that I enjoy about it. And a lot of that comes from John Leguizamo's clown character, which I know it's extremely divisive, and it's very easy to hate the clown. But you know, before I go too farther, why don't you go ahead and tell me? Well, I kind of know where you're going, but go ahead and tell me how much you hated this movie.
So I don't know if you put sound effects in your show, but if you do, you could do the finger knuckle cracking sound as I prepare myself to go through this. But man, I went in totally open-minded. You know, I had really no idea what to expect. I actually thought it was rated R going into it, which, I mean, I don't really think that matters. I thought it was going to. I mean, would more blood have made this movie better? No.
But I am curious because, after I watched it, I did look, and apparently there is a director's cut release that is R-rated. But I didn't watch that, and I haven't seen it, so I am curious how different that is. It said that there's 40 minutes of extra footage.
Interesting. That's way too much. Because thankfully it was only 95 minutes, so that was a very tight, nice 95 minutes. Because 97 minutes of it, I don't know if I would have been able to hold. I actually watched it in 3 sections. I watched a half hour, and then I took a break. I needed a cleansing for a little bit. It was probably right around the maggot pizza moment where I needed to take a moment and walk away. But yeah, let's start with that. The Leguizamo character. I love John Leguizamo. One of my favorite movies ever is Chef, the John Favreau movie. And one of the reasons I love that movie so much is because I think he is the absolute perfect best friend character in that movie. I don't think there has been a better best friend in a movie than him in that movie. And I mean, obviously I've loved him in many other things, but that in particular is the one that stands out. To see him stoop to the levels he has to stoop to.
Like
in
literally
this movie,
stoop too.
Yeah, literally, because he's like playing a character 3 feet tall. I mean, I just cannot believe. I mean, I don't know the man. I cannot believe he looks back on this and goes, I have fond memories of making Spawn. I just, and I haven't even started talking about President Jed Bartlett yet, who I will talk about in a moment. But Leguizamo in particular is just, it's grotesque. It's for that. I mean, I understand that like the purpose of his character is to be as just awful as possible. But the things they made him do, I mean, whether it's the underwear, like taking it off and like
the literal skid marks.
Yeah, like that whole scene was just, I actually I've got my phone out and like I recorded that scene and sent it to a friend who is a comic book fan and has seen this movie and had warned me I may not like it. And I said, what am I watching? Because it's something. It is a marvel to, no pun intended, to watch, as he is just one of the most grotesque characters I've ever seen. And for that, I guess it is a success.
Yeah, I think that character is like a force of nature, and I do agree that it is jarring just because of all the childish humor and just the absolute disgustingness of it, which I think part of it works, but I think that I just think that really the low level of humor, like not so much the disgusting part, but just the simplicity of a lot of the humor. It's like he just goes for all the easy jokes, and I think
bodily humor jokes, and it's things like that, and it's tonally it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like it matches with the Spawn character and kind of the actual mission that Martin Sheen's character is under. And I mean, technically, it's the clown's character's mission in totality, but the tone of it doesn't seem right. There's which this was also kind of curiously poignant in a way, like with the virus and the stuff like that. That was kind of a little weird, but the fact that there's actually this whole pseudo Mission Impossible 2 plot happening, and then to have him being this just bizarre, grotesque character, it felt tonally way off to me.
Yeah, it's like he's supposed to be the comic relief, but instead of diffusing the seriousness, it just completely takes over and goes in a different direction for a little while. It's not so much defense of this movie, but some of the things that I do enjoy about it is how present the clown is throughout the movie, which in some cases they go a little bit too far, like with him being the clown at the daughter's birthday party. It's that is kind of good, but also bad at the same time. And one of the little things that I did notice is, early on, before Michael Jai White's character even dies, his wife Wanda has a clown air freshener hanging from her rearview mirror, and that's just a little detail. It's stuff like that. You can tell that I think a lot of people that made this movie did want to bring the Spawn directly from the comics, but I think a lot of it was a failure with the writing, with the directing, with the editing, and with the constraints that they were limited by, to where they weren't able to make the movie that they wanted to make.
Yeah, it's wild to me that this movie came out 3 years before X-Men and 4 years before Raimi's Spider-Man. They seem like from two different worlds. It's like when I would watch for our podcast, when you watch a black and white movie from the 40s or something. We just did His Girl Friday about a month or so ago. You watch that, and that's not a negative look on that movie. It's just like, this is how movies looked. And then you do something, 50 years later, where it's, we did Speed Racer recently. So it's like, comparing those two movies, you're just like, well, these aren't even really in the same world, right? Well, that's like almost how I feel about Spawn versus like Spider-Man. Like the look of it feels like it's 30 years old in a lot of places. And it's tough to see. I actually liked his facial makeup. I thought they did a really good job with that. And I think that's the practical nature of those things is what allows those things to be long lasting. And I believe there is actually some of that in The Mist. I think some of the larger things actually were practical effects. I don't think it was all CGI. But that being said, like his face looked to me like he was kind of a cross between, I don't know, did you watch The Outsider? It was on HBO a couple years ago or last year, I think.
No, I didn't see that.
So like the face that they gave that character in Small Glimpses and Electro from The Amazing Spider-Man 2, the Jamie Foxx, if you combined those two faces, this is what you would get. And it's really good. I think that for that part of the character and the makeup and stuff, I think it's really solid.
Oh, and it's not too far moved from like Deadpool either.
Sure. Yeah. Which, so kind of before its time in terms of like, but again, those lasting effects, if you really want to go there, 4 years before this was Jurassic Park, my favorite movie of all time, and a movie that will always hold up because of practical effects, because they made things that were really there. And so it was easy then to hold up, like, 25, 30 years later, it holds up because you look at it and go, I still think that thing is there.
And I think the best looking character is the monstrous form of the Violator. And because that was one where they started with a practical model and then they digitized it. Like I don't know what they did with Malboja, the devil, because that is absolutely.
I read somewhere it's just a sock puppet, right? Is that correct? Did I get that right?
That I don't know, but it looks like a PlayStation 1, boss
it's really
character.
Bad. It's really bad.
But I think that is, and especially the entire hell scenes in general. I think that was one of those that was like one of the last minute things, and that would be an effect that they shopped out to a different one, where the Violator and I think the cape, which is the other thing that I think looks really good.
Okay.
That was handled by ILM because DePay and Spaz Williams were both from ILM at the time.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the cape looks fine. I think practically speaking, it's very weird and it doesn't make a lot of sense. Mostly because, so if this is an origin story, if that's the idea, I think there are two main things that for me the movie fails in. One is it doesn't really give you his origin in that it's almost like it's omitted. Like
it's like they skip ahead.
Yeah.
Now it's 5 years later, and then your wife now has a 6-year-old girl with.
And you, it's
with
like
your partner.
Exactly. The jump ahead, you kind of get a little like where the clown character tells him what happened, sort of, and you get that very brief like, here's the army and all that sort of stuff. But if it's an origin story and you don't give us any origin, then you don't really have much, right? So for me,
I think that entire subplot is something that makes zero sense, and that's something that is really awful in general, and it's a failing of the writing and especially the editing. It makes no sense that they would have this guy then that he sold his soul to lead the army, and then they just throw him out in the gutter 5 years later with no memory and no one to like. I mean, the clown's there to guide him, but he doesn't show up right away. It's like he just leaves him off on his own for a while and then shows up later.
And then I would say the second part of that is, there's always a training montage, right? And in this movie, it's, 4 minutes. It's around the hour mark. So you're in the third act at this point already. And it's too late. It's too late to have him learning how to use his suit when about to go into his fight with the big bad. It's too late. And yeah, they bumble that entire thing. And so and this is what I'm saying is I looked at it as like big picture as possible, like even taking into consideration when it was released and so excusing even some of the graphics, understanding that, but like story wise, it just doesn't work. And
yeah, Cogliostro, the mentor character, like I love his look. I love the actor that plays him.
Sure.
But yeah, he is just completely written horribly.
He's in another movie. He's in a different movie. Like that, it feels very much like there are multiple ideas being thrown here, and they just went, let's just have it all in here, and that's rough. It's definitely rough. It made me very relieved. I read 2 casting what ifs for this movie, and one of them was that Will Smith was considered for the lead role, but he ended up doing Men in Black instead, which he will probably forever thank his stars. I know he always talks about how he turned down Neo, for The Matrix, but him turning down Spawn was maybe his best decision, to do Men in Black instead, because, what a much better world. And same year, better graphics. I understand the cockroach doesn't necessarily hold up either, but it's a million times better than everything that's in this movie. That's one. The second one was apparently Ed Norton was in consideration for the partner role, but left to do Rounders instead, which again, ultimate clutch decision, because I'm a huge fan of Rounders, and Worm is one of just the great characters of the 90s. And for him to have been just a throwaway extra role in Spawn, I can't even imagine the great Ed Norton doing that. So thankfully, we have the characters or the actors that we have in this movie.
I do like the performance of Martin Sheen's character, Jason Wynn. Like he is just so over the top. I just love it so much. Like it's one of those things, and I think it helps that I've seen this movie a few times. Like I think this is probably my third, maybe fourth watch over the past 15 years or so. I think it helps that I knew what I was going into coming into it, and
of course,
and I am someone who's more inclined to enjoy the bad superhero movies just because it's my thing.
Oh, of course.
I'm not ashamed
I
of
get
it.
that.
Yeah.
I get that. That's totally fine. The only thing that I was going to say is why Martin Sheen? And I read that he did it because he wanted to be in a comic book movie for his grandkids or kids or whoever at the time.
Yeah, and I did watch I think it's interesting. I watched a bit of the behind the scenes featurette that was on one of the DVD releases, and he talks about him taking the role and telling it to, I forget if it was his son or his grandson, and he's like, I told him that I'm going to be in this movie Spawn, and then the kid was like, Spawn? You mean like you're going to be in Spawn? And he was like super excited because he was familiar with the comic book and the character and all that.
When you look at his IMDb, 1995, he was in The American President, and that's a respected movie. He has a decent sized role in that movie, but years before, and even the couple years after, there really isn't much that you would look at and go, wow, he was in that. It's nothing. It feels like The West Wing kind of saved him, because The West Wing started, I believe, in 1999. And so it's a couple years after that. But I'm not saying that we would have never heard of Martin Sheen again, but he's not in anything worthwhile for a decent chunk there of the 90s. This could have been it. Where, we don't really get to see Martin Sheen anymore after this, but then The West Wing. But it was hard to watch. It was hard to watch knowing how great he is I haven't watched all of The West Wing. I've watched about half of it, and he's amazing. He's just, he's just the best. And it's just, you look at the two characters and you just don't know how you can relate. That's the same person? How is it the same person? It's almost like watching a great actor perform two different roles. If you want to talk about, like, just the first one that came to my head was Heath Ledger, his role in Brokeback Mountain versus his role in The Dark Knight. Like, you're like, that's the same person? Oh my God, that's amazing. Like, what an amazing actor. You hold up the Jason Wynn in Spawn and President Jed Bartlett in West Wing, you're like, that's the same actor? How? It's the same type of thing, but in a much, different world.
This movie, it wasn't a bomb, but it also wasn't successful. It just basically made its budget back.
Right. There's no sequel for a reason.
Yeah, but it has been there's been talks of it being rebooted forever, and this is something that I'm just springing it on you right now.
Yeah.
But if you were to recast this movie for the upcoming reboot, who would you cast for the Spawn character, like the D.B. Sweeney partner character, who I think in the comics it's Twitch, who is a slightly different character, but I think it's most similar to the D.B. Sweeney character in this film, and the clown. We'll just do 3.
Ooh. Okay. The first name that came to my mind for Spawn was John Boyega.
Okay, yeah.
Because I think there is a certain swagger to him that I think could really work. And I mean, he's not afraid to do, these sorts of things. Obviously, he might be a little hesitant post Star Wars because I know he didn't enjoy that time so much. But I think if you had a really, an able director and a good script, I think it's something you could maybe sell him on. And I just love him. I think he's awesome. So I think that would be great. As far as like the oh man, that's really hard. Give me, using this episode as a jumping off point, give me Toby Jones as the clown character. Just kind of
like full CGI.
Sure. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change my mind. Sorry, Toby Jones. Give me Andy Serkis doing performance mocap art as the clown character, and give me a Gollum-like character instead. And I think you got something pretty amazing there. And you're talking about like the random, like, medieval archer guy, right? That's the guy.
No, it was his partner, like his.
So
who I think in the reboot he would have a more expanded role. He's like,
sure.
Twitch is a bigger character, but I think the person that in this film is most like the Twitch character in the comics would be the D.B. Sweeney.
So you're talking about the cookie cutter white guy, right? His partner?
Yes.
Okay. So I mean, at that point, I mean, it could be kind of anybody. So give me. I'm so knee deep right now in Coen's movies. That's all I can think of right now. I've been rewatching all of them. So give me. Then let's dip our toes into Can we do Marvel? Can you use Marvel actors? I mean, everybody's been in Marvel, right?
Sure.
Then give me Evans. Give me Chris Evans. Give me Boyega and Chris Evans as partners. Maybe you get, more stuff with them as partners before all of the stuff happens, and then you can add a little bit of depth to their relationship. So there you go. How about that? On spurring it on me, that's the best I can do.
Nice. I think that's not too bad. But I think that's about all we need to talk about with Spawn. But I'd like to thank you once again for joining me on the return of Filmwhys. And why don't you go ahead and remind everybody where they can find you online?
Awesome. Thanks again so much. It was a lot of fun to discuss. So myself, I'm on Twitter at Mr. Justin Gott. That's Mr. Justin Gott, Gott with 2 T's. Our show is at TRR Movie Podcast on Twitter and Instagram. And then our website is ramblingramblers.com. We have a full blown out website. You can actually see all the Remake This graphics on there from every movie we've done it for. You can read all of our parting shots. We put those on there so you can read them if you want. Also we have a nice cool like coming soon look so you can see what our next movies are going to be. And yeah, you can find us everywhere you get podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all those places. So definitely look for us again at TRR Movie Podcast on Twitter.
And as always, I'm Bubba Wheat. You can find me on Twitter at Bubba Wheat. And you can find this podcast, Filmwhys, on anchor.fm. Just search for Filmwhys. And a second season of It's Time to Rewind is coming out next week with Trapped in the Twilight Zone. And further episodes of Filmwhys will be coming out once every month. So until next time,